Welcome to Issues That Matter. My guest today is Scott Ritter, and we're going to talk about the Russian fighter jet that shot down the U.S. drone. And he's going to tell us about the implications for this. So, Scott, is this like really serious stuff?
Well, I mean, it is serious. A $32 million piece of American military hardware was lost, brought down by the actions of a foreign power. So, yeah, absolutely, this is serious. This MQ-9 Reaper drone was being flown in support of national security tasking. So obviously, the United States National Command Authority felt that this mission was essential to the security of the United States, and so to have the drone interdicted and have its mission terminated at the hands of another power is very serious stuff. But all of that doesn't answer the question, why were we doing this? I mean, okay. So yeah. First of all,
I'm sorry.
we were flying this drone along the coastline of Crimean Peninsula. And if anybody knows anything about Russia, especially modern Russian history, post-Soviet, the Crimean Peninsula has always been deemed to be of strategic importance to Russia. It dominates the Black Sea. Whoever possesses this controls, basically what amounts to a giant aircraft carrier. Also, naval bases are there. So this is a place of vital strategic importance to Russia. This importance has become even more so now that Russia is involved in this special military operation in Ukraine. The Crimea has become pretty much a military base, a jumping off point for Russian troops, aircraft, logistics, artillery, etc. It's on the front lines of the conflict. The Ukrainians have threatened over and over again to strike at Crimea, and indeed on several occasions have. They've used unmanned underwater drones to attack Russian shipping. They used a terrorist bomb to take down at least one lane of the Crimea bridge. They've launched repeated attacks using their own drones against sites in Crimea. So it is an active war zone. Russia has deemed the Crimea Peninsula to be a place of sensitivity, and they have put in place they call exclusion zones along the coast that prevent nations from flying or sailing ships into the waters or the airspace above. And these exclusion zones have they're enforceable legally, meaning that if somebody violates that, Russia has the legal right under international law to use military force to bring an end to the violation. The United States, however, doesn't recognize Russia's possession of Crimea. They view the Crimea Peninsula as Ukraine. They view that the Russian annexation of Crimea in 2014 is unlawful, and therefore Russia has no legal authority to establish an exclusion zone. Now, these are diplomatic and political niceties. We know that Russia is establishing this, so we want to prove a point. And you've heard this by numerous people about how we are exercising freedom of navigation, and that this was innocent passage under international law, and that Russia had no right to interdict the drone. The concept of innocent passage means that the aircraft or ship should be just that, innocent, should not be a party to the conflict, for instance. The United States, however, is very much a party to the conflict. We are supplying Ukraine not only with equipment, but we are providing them with planning, with logistic support, and in support of both operational intelligence gathered by various intelligence collection platforms that the United States operates in and around Ukraine, to include the MQ-9 Reaper. If somebody takes a close look at the video of the Reaper that was released by the Russian government when a Russian fighter plane flew by. Under the left wing is a pod. That pod is a advanced signals intelligence collection pod. It means it collects communications, intercepts, radar transmissions, and other signals of interest. So already it's not innocent passage because we're engaged in active spying on Russia. But then we have to recognize that we take this intelligence and we provide it to the Ukrainian government, who then turns it over to their military, who uses this intelligence to target Russian infrastructure in Crimea. So we are now an active player in the war. We are a participant in the conflict. The MQ-9 Reaper is an aircraft that is violating the security of Russia, and Russia brought it down. Now, they didn't shoot it down. They actually, on 19 occasions, tried to get the attention of the drone operator by flying close to the vehicle in a way that was observable by the Americans who were operating the MQ-9 Reaper in an effort to get them to deviate off course, but they refused to do so. So the Russians then resorted to a tactic that has been in use since the Cold War to dump fuel on the aircraft in an effort to disrupt its flight operations and compel it to leave. Unfortunately for the MQ-9 Reaper, during the process of one of these fuel dumps, damage was inflicted on the MQ-9 Reaper's propeller system that caused the Reaper to lose aerodynamic stability, and it crashed into the Black Sea, where Russia now is in the process of trying to recover the drone. There's a lot of people saying, well, that means Russia downed it. Russia committed act of war. No, the United States committed the act of war by flying the MQ-9 Reaper along the coastline of Russia in a way that was configured to gather intelligence that, when turned over to Ukraine, could be used against Russia. Russia exercised legitimate national defense. Now, the United States has said that they're not going to be intimidated by this action, that they're going to continue to fly missions. And indeed, the other day, they flew an MQ-9 Reaper mission, but it stayed well outside of the exclusion zone. It monitored the Russian recovery efforts of the downed drone, and then was replaced later on by a larger, I think, RQ-4 Global Hawk drone, the same kind that was shot down by Iran over the Straits of Hormuz, a very capable intelligence collection platform. But this too has flown far away from the Russian coast. So I think the Russians have made their point that anything that violates the exclusion zone set by Russia along the Crimean coast will be treated as a hostile target, and the Russians will act accordingly.
Well, a drone is an unmanned
aerial vehicle, yeah.
Right. So tell us the similarities between what just happened and Francis Gary Powers.
Well, I mean, Francis Gary Powers was flying a U-2 aircraft over Soviet territory in 1960, and he was shot down by Soviet surface-to-air missiles. He was violating the territorial integrity of the Soviet Union, and he was carrying out active espionage against or spying operations against the Soviets. So he was a legitimate target. There's nobody debates that. There's no difference whatsoever between what happened to Gary Powers and what happened to MQ-9 drone. These are the same thing. Each involved the violation of the territory of Soviet Union or Russia. Each was carried out operating and conducting active intelligence gathering, and each were shot down or brought down.
So obviously there won't be any political prisoners in this. Do you think this is going to escalate, or do you think things will remain as they are right now?
Well, the interesting thing about escalation is you have to have the means and mechanisms to escalate. Now we know that people like Lindsey Graham, people like Marco Rubio, people like Tom Cotton, these are senators, all Republicans, have made some very aggressive statements about the need to, for instance, escort MQ-9s with manned U.S. fighter aircraft and to shoot down any Russian aircraft that come out into international airspace to challenge them. It sounds good on paper, and it always sounds good when a politician says that to the camera. Trying to make that happen in real life is far different. First of all, there is a plethora of Russian air defense systems operating in the region. So right off the bat, any American aircraft that operates in such a hostile manner in the vicinity of the Crimean Peninsula will be shot down by the air defense systems. Second of all, the United States cannot sortie enough aircraft to have to be able to successfully carry out escort operation. If challenged by Russia, Russia will be able to put up more airplanes. Russia will have air defense. Russia will dominate the airspace, and every American aircraft sent up will be shot down. That's just an absolute guarantee. So it's irresponsible to speak of escalation. I think that there will be, as in the past, I think the United States will back down in a face-saving measure. And I think flying the RQ-4 Global Hawk is a face-saving measure where we say, see, we threw a drone up there, but we didn't challenge the airspace. And we will actively look for ways to de-escalate because it's not in our interest to escalate. It can only end badly for the United States. And at the end of the day, we know we did wrong. We know that we were the ones who violated an exclusion zone. We want to make legal niceties, but we know that if the tables were turned, that we would have done the exact same thing or worse.
You're on a lot of videos. You do my video, you do many others, and the many others have a far more reach than I do. Given the fact that you're reaching a lot of people on the internet, what percentage of the people in the United States realize that we're the aggressor?
I would say that probably a significant percentage are aware that that argument has been made. Whether or not they accept that argument is a different thing altogether. And that's an element of personal belief, what information sources they choose to prioritize, whether it be mainstream media or things they can get on online. So it's going to be difficult for me to put a number on it. What I can say is this: sometimes I can do a video that will get more viewers than Rachel Maddow. Sometimes I can do a video that gets less viewers than Don Lemon. So it's hit and miss. The problem is persistence. Rachel Maddow can go on, on a regular basis with slick production values and consistently get her message across. Whereas with people like myself who almost exclusively use the internet to put information out there, it's very much hit or miss. Whether or not we get lucky, it's like having all the stars align to have the right podcast at the right time. Who knows what the right podcast is? Cynthia, you and I could produce a podcast that gets 1 million views if we have the right issue at the right time. It hits and it catches on. Or we can have we can do the best conversation, but we miss that window and it rots sort of there in the internet never land where 3 people watched it. My wife, my daughter, and your friend. So we just don't know how it works. It's an uphill struggle to get the information out there. Good news is the information is out there. People are seeing it. And I think there's a growing recognition by the American public at large that they are not being well served by mainstream media.
What's next, do you think?
On this issue, the U.S. backs down. There's nothing more we can do about it. We don't have the means to escalate. Again, people can talk about escalation, but if you don't have the means to escalate, then you can't escalate. And it makes no sense. We know we're in the wrong. So we'll find intelligence resources that collect the same information that we were trying to collect with the MQ-9 Reaper, but not put itself in a a bubble of vulnerability, and we'll just move forward. There'll be other provocations elsewhere, but at the end of the day, Russia's winning this war. Russia's winning along the entire front. Ukraine is running out of ammunition. They're going to squander whatever reserves they have accumulated in a futile counteroffensive that has no chance of success. And this war is going to be over by the end of summer, early fall. And there's nothing the U.S. can change that.
But Scott, let me play devil's advocate for a minute. When the war first started, you thought it would be over very quickly, and it didn't get over very quickly. Do you think your predictions is right on target?
My predictions have always been right on target. When I made that prediction up front, remember, it was the same prediction that the director of the CIA had, the same director that General Mark Milley had. Why? Because we all believed that Russia would go in doctrinal. We believed that Russia was going to war. And had Russia gone to war in February 24th, this war would have been over in a week. The Ukrainian military simply could not have withstood the violence that would have been perpetrated on it by the Russian forces. But Russia didn't go to war. That's what shocked everybody. That's where we got it wrong. It wasn't a matter of misjudging Russian strength. It was a matter of misjudging Russian political intent. And what we now know is that the Russians went in soft, deliberately soft, in an effort to guide the Ukrainians to the negotiating table, which they did. 3 negotiations that took place in early March in Gomel and Belarus that led to a 4th that was scheduled for 1 April. And what was going to happen on 1 April? The war was going to end. That's what Russia wanted. They didn't want to kill the Ukrainians, destroy the Ukrainian army. They wanted the war to end. They wanted to be able to create conditions where Ukraine would admit or acknowledge that they weren't going to join NATO. That's what Russia wanted. And they had it until Boris Johnson flew in and ended that agreement. Now Russia has been recovering from that ever since. But as soon as Russia transitioned to phase 2, I said Russia will win this war. But I also said that it's going to become a meat grinder operation because now Ukraine had a chance to adjust. It was no longer surprised. You weren't doctrinally, they didn't have enough troops. Then they received tens of billions of dollars of Western aid, which I said is a game-changing event. I said, because the West has now committed tens of billions, the game is going to change. And unless Russia adapts to this, Russia will get in trouble. And Russia didn't adapt. Russia got in trouble. The offenses in Kharkov and Kherson were evident. But then Russia solidified its defense. They mobilized. And ever since their mobilization, I have said consistently that this is basic military math. The Russians are killing Ukrainians in large numbers. Ukraine is not getting enough resources to reconstitute. Russians are being killed in smaller numbers, but Russia is having massive amounts of reconstitution. And now we have a situation where this force equation is being played out on a battlefield where Russia is dominating. Russia has killed 320,000 Ukrainian soldiers, Cynthia. That is not a defeat. That's a massive loss of life. We didn't lose that many Americans throughout the entire Second World War in both the Pacific and the European theaters. So let the numbers sink in. Russia is slaughtering the Ukrainians, and it's only increasing at greater and greater numbers. The Ukrainian defense is collapsing throughout the entire front. Ukraine will run out of ammunition this summer. The equipment that NATO is providing Ukraine is too little, too late, not of sufficient quality or quantity. So, no, I think I've got it right. But you know who else thinks I got it right? Xi Jinping thinks I got it right. The Chinese military academies have come together and they did a big study in preparation to his trip to Moscow. They said, how's this war going to end? And they came out and said, imagine this, Cynthia. They said the war is going to end this summer or early fall. That Ukraine has no chance, that it's over. So that's what's given Xi Jinping the impetus to come in and argue for a peace agreement to the Ukrainians, to tell the Ukrainians, if you continue this war, you will lose everything. So let's try and stop this war so you at least hold on to something.
So, this might be a discussion for another show at another time, but because of this, will the face of Europe change? Will there be a lot of changes within Europe that are understandable to the regular person?
I think Europe's already changed. Um, Look, take a look at France. The collapsing French economy has prompted Emmanuel Macron to change the pension laws in an unconstitutional manner. And look at the demonstrations in the street. I know on TV we don't see them. They're shutting Paris down. They're shutting Paris down. They're raising barricades. They're going to go to war. Now, whether it ends up being a war is another thing, but the French are basically revolting against Macron. In Germany, there's a growing revolt. Throughout Europe, people are starting to rise up. Europe has already been changed because of the economic consequences of the sanctions that have boomeranged back on it. And then when this war in Ukraine is over and Russia wins, NATO will be left to realize that it is an empty suit, a paper tiger, and that it will cost too much money to be rebuilt. So Europe's going to have to come up with a European security framework that's more along the lines of what Russia's thinking about than what the United States is thinking about. And people who would say, well, America would never let that happen, just reflect on what just happened in the Middle East, where for the last couple of decades, the United States has been trying to build a Gulf Arab coalition to confront Iran, centered on Saudi Arabia, and has been pushing for Israel to make peace with Saudi Arabia and normalize relations. But what did the Chinese do? They came in and instead they negotiated reconciliation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, ending this American-led thing. The Americans have nothing in the Middle East anymore except an isolated Israel. Saudi Arabia and Iran are normalizing relations, and they're tilting towards China. They're selling their oil using Chinese currency. They're both going to join the Chinese-dominated BRICS economic forum. It's over for America in the Middle East. And I'm here to tell you right now, in the next decade, it's going to be over for America in Europe.
Wow. So how is your blog coming along?
I don't know. I do it, and I write stuff. Sometimes it appears, I mean, some of the articles get picked up pretty good, but it's still, it's not a mainstream blog. I think it's, it resonates somewhat, but it could always do better. But it's an uphill battle, starting from zero. You can't go, we're not all Hercules. We can't go from zero to hero overnight. It's a journey.
And how's your book sales coming along?
I mean, the book is in its fourth printing right now, so I guess that means it's doing okay, and we'll see. We'll continue to promote it. I think it resonates. It's an important book for the time. It's not only a book about history, but it's a book about U.S.-Russian relations and how arms control can be used as a vehicle to break through the kind of troubles that we face today.
So give us a little synopsis of what the book is about.
Well, the book is a history of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that was signed in 1987, implemented in 1988. The treaty got rid of an entire category of nuclear weapons that were threatening the world with imminent nuclear annihilation. One of the key elements of this treaty is, for the first time ever, it incorporated on-site inspections as part of their treaty verification tool set. This meant that teams of inspectors like myself would leave the United States, go to the Soviet Union to physically inspect the sites to make sure that the Soviets were in compliance with their treaty obligations, and the Soviets would do the same thing in the United States. One of the unique aspects of this is that we put in place at a Soviet missile factory a permanent monitoring facility, which was unique, and I was part of the team that built it. And so this book is about that facility, the city of Votkinsk, how we built this facility outside of a missile factory together with our Soviet counterparts, and how we overcame a whole bunch of obstacles, weather, politics, and just the difficulty of trying to build a multi-million-dollar high-tech facility in the middle of nowhere with no, as one of my bosses once said, there is no Radio Shack. So if something breaks, we don't get to go to Radio Shack and get the spare part. If something breaks, we have to be able to fix it on site, or else the treaty doesn't work. And so, we were 750 miles away from Moscow, east in the foothills of the Ural Mountains, and a part of the Soviet Union where no foreigners had ever been allowed because it was considered so sensitive. So that's about that. It's about, the human relationships that took place. You know, how people like myself have been trained to kill a commie for mommy, better dead than red. And suddenly we're there not to kill the Soviets, but to hug the Soviets, metaphorically speaking, become their friends. And the process, that the transitioning from enemy to colleague to friend that took place. And then also just the fact that we were doing this in the time of perestroika, which was itself a revolutionary process in the former Soviet Union, transitioning from old school communist domination to democracy. It didn't work, it failed, and we were there, eyewitnesses to the effort and to the failure of perestroika. And lastly, it's an experience that I call it a template of success, because we successfully overcame all the difficulties to make this treaty happen. When people today say, well, how could we ever get out of this mess we're in with the Russians? I say, well, we've already done it. You see, George Santayana has that famous quote where he says, those who fail to learn the lessons of history are condemned to repeat it. But sometimes the lesson of history isn't a condemnation, but an opportunity. We have a lesson of history in form of the INF Treaty that it showed us how we did something right. And so maybe by reading this book, you'll be awoken to the fact that there is a template of success that we can all rely upon and hope to achieve a similar miracle to bring the US and Russia together in the cause of arms control, but in the larger cause of normalizing relations between two nations, so we don't be cast adrift on a path towards nuclear annihilation.
And how can people purchase your book?
Well, you can go to the publisher site, claritypress.com. You can go, if you want an autographed copy of the book, we have the ability, if you go to scottritterextra.com, there's a feature there where you can purchase the book. I have them here. I sign them, and I put them in a mailer, and then I take them to the mailbox or to the post office, and I mail them, and you get an autographed copy of the book. So you can do that. You can go to Amazon if you want. You can go to Barnes and Nobles. It's out there. It's available, and I encourage people to read it. I think I mean, everybody who's read it says it's an entertaining book. It's not as though you're going to be bored to death. So it's a good story, but it's also an important story.
Great. So Scott, we will chat again as this whole thing evolves. As it evolves every day, right?
That's right.
You've been listening to Scott Ritter. I'm Cynthia Pooler. This is Issues That Matter. If you like this show, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks, Scott. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a great day.